Good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Andrew Roop. I am a chiropractor, and I'm really looking forward to spending some time together this evening during our webinar. If you're a parent or a provider that's spending time tonight here, that's listening in on this conversation about anxiety and ADHD and sensory processing disorder, I'm willing to bet that you've got a child who's dealing with those issues, or maybe they're chronically sick, or maybe they're frustrated and always at the burst of a meltdown. For some reason, you're listening in, and I'm also willing to bet that if that's you, that you're probably someone who's looking for answers, that you're looking for help, you're looking for solutions. And honestly, if you're like a lot of the parents that we talk to, you're probably at the end of your rope and you don't really know where to turn, and you're just wondering why. Why is this going on? Why are my children struggling? And if that's you, I promise you are in the right place, because that's what we're all about here at Thrive, is figuring out the why, figuring out how do we get to this point? What is going on? Why do we have so many kids that are struggling? So like I said, I'm a chiropractor here, and that might make you think initially, wait a minute, why is a chiropractor talking about stuff like sensory processing disorder and anxiety and ADHD? Trust me, I promise we're going to get to that before the evening is over here. But as much as I'm here as a chiropractor, honestly, I'm here as a concerned individual, a concerned person, because we've got more and more kids who are struggling in more and more severe ways, and that's not okay, right? I can't necessarily tell you that I understand, because I don't have a child who's dealing with those issues, who's struggling with the things that your family might be struggling with. So I can't tell you I understand, but what I can 100% tell you is that we care, that I care, that everyone at Thrive truly cares what your family is going through. And we know that this is something that affects more than just that child, right? This is the siblings are affected by that. Parents, you guys are drained because it's constant visits and therapies and appointments, and you're pulling all these extra resources to make help this child reach their full potential. And that's absolutely what you should. And it's not like you would ever consider doing anything else as a parent. But what we want to do is help make your life a little bit more boring and help that be even more effective for you. And so you don't have to maybe have quite as hecticness to help your child be at their best. So that's what we're going to be going through tonight. And like I said, I don't necessarily know exactly what it's like, but we live it here in the office, and we do care. So I'm not a pediatrician. I'm not a psychiatrist. I can't prescribe medications or therapies for your kid. And honestly, I don't think that's what you're here for. You're looking not to hear my opinion either. You're wanting answers. You're wanting science. You're wanting facts. You want to know research. You don't want to hear just another story or another far off explanation. You're looking for the why. And that's what we're going to go through here tonight. So thank you for tuning in. Just a little bit so you know how this works. This is a live webinar here. So I'm going to do my best to kind of keep tabs on the Facebook post where we've got this going on. So if you're tuning in, give me a hi, give me a hello. Let me know that everything's coming across loud and clear. You can see me. We're also going to be bouncing back and forth between some different slides to lay out and explain what we're going through. So if at any point I'm talking and explaining something that doesn't make sense because it seems like there's supposed to be a slide there and it's not, just let me know and we'll clarify that. But I am going to pull that up here right now while I look for those waves and those hellos from you all. All right, so let's get those slides started, guys. There we go. So a little bit about Thrive. We are a pediatric and prenatal focused office. And what that means is that we are all about kids. We are all about your family. We're located here in Cranberry Township. And from the get-go, for me personally in education, kids and families is what we were all about. We wanted to pursue how we could help, how we could reach more kids. And so that's everything that the office has been designed for. I am primarily a husband and a dad, like you can probably see there on the screen. We've got my beautiful wife and two little boys who are a handful, hopefully behaving tonight at bedtime for my wife. And so that's where we are first, is we are a family. And we also grew up in Western Pennsylvania here. We bleed black and gold, and this has been a part of everything that I've always I grew up in Katanning, so we always knew once the schooling phase and traveling to internships and all that settled down, we wanted to be back in this area to raise our own family and to affect the families here. Because Cranberry, Wexford, the North Hills here is such a family-focused community that lines up with our values that we know that's where we wanted to raise our family, and those are the sort of lives that we want to impact at the office. And you'll see stuff like graduated with valedictorian, and we could talk a lot about advanced trainings and ICPA certifications and the National Wellness Foundation. And I don't say any of that to impress you, but rather to just say that what we do with your kids is important to us, right? It's something that we take seriously. It's not like oh yeah, and we might take care of kids. That is the focus. That is the reason the office exists. And honestly, the more degrees, the more letters, the more certifications after someone's name usually just means that they owe other people a lot of money. It doesn't say anything. It's the actual experience and the stories that come from the office, which is why hopefully you follow us on Instagram and Thrive, and you can, or on Facebook and Instagram, and you can see those stories. You can see the lives that we get to impact here at the office. And that's what we're going to share here tonight, a story by the end of the evening. But the thing about Thrive, the thing about everything that we do is it's driven by this belief that kids are meant to be happy, they're meant to be healthy, and they're meant to truly thrive. But unfortunately, that's not taking place. If it was, like, we probably wouldn't have anything to talk about here tonight. We know that 1 out of every 10 kids is being diagnosed with ADHD, 1 in 6 with sensory processing disorder, 90% of kids by age 2 have an ear infection. The autism rates are now under 1 in 50 in many areas. There's so many statistics that we could rattle on, and that's not what tonight's about, because you already know all of those. We've got access to that in Google, and you're one of those parents. I can bet you more than anything that you've been down the Google rabbit trail, and you know all about detoxes and red dye 40 and essential oils and cleanses and diet and the gut brain and all those things. And that's going to be perfect. And it's going to make even more sense after we share here tonight. But you know that, right? You know that we're not where we're supposed to be. And honestly, times have changed a lot. If we can think back to at least when I was growing up and what life was like, there were pretty much 2 rules. It came down to, if you wanted to not get in trouble at school and with your parents, you don't call kids other names. You don't bully, you're not mean to other people. And the other one was, you don't do drugs. Those are about as simple as it could get. But unfortunately, we're not doing a very good job of either of those things at that point. We've got a long list of names and medications and or names to label people with and slap a diagnosis on. And then it's even a longer list of medications and different options and drugs that we could pair up with those diagnoses and labels. And I'll stop right there and say that this isn't, I'm not trying to say that these medications are bad things or that, we shouldn't be using them or taking them. That's your own personal family's decision. But for me, what I'm always interested in is the cause, the why. And I don't know about you, but I've never met a child who, they were given, they had ADHD because there was a deficiency of Ritalin or Concerta in their body, right? These medications are not treating the cause or the why behind it. They're immensely helpful in managing those symptoms and bringing that back to a calm state, but it's not answering the question of why. It's not really getting that child to their best. And so that's what tonight is about. 3 steps, 3 plans for you guys. One is we just got to share hope, because so many of the parents that we've met and that we've spoken with, they don't have any. They're at the end of their rope and they think that this is as good as it gets, right? They're like, oh, well, my doctor, my pediatrician, my therapist, my psychiatrist says that maybe they'll grow out of it, or maybe this is just their life forever. And I can tell you that doesn't necessarily have to be that way. The way that we can really provide that hope, though, is through answers, is through connecting the dots, through explanations, through science, and through showing you how something that's in plain sight and that really you probably already know really is explaining why so many kids are struggling. So we're going to get to that. And ultimately, and this is the most important thing, is we've got to leave with action steps. I'm a science nerd. I love learning. I love reading. I love all of that. But even I will tell you that phrase, knowledge is power, is incomplete. It doesn't really change your life if you just learn, if you just have more knowledge. So I like to say knowledge is potential power. It's not until you take action on it that you can actually make a difference and make an impact on your life. So that's what I want to make sure that we leave tonight with, is not just more information or more knowledge and you can go home thinking, oh, I learned something. We want to actually take action on it. We want to make a difference for your family. So first thing up is actually, I've got a quiz for you. So I hope you're paying attention. Before I jump over here, let me make sure that our Facebook feed is going, that there's not any questions. All right, looks good. All right, so I hope everyone is ready for their awareness test, because that's what we've got here. You should be able to hear the sound and everything, but what's going to come up is a video with a question. And the question is, how many passes does the team in white make?
This is an awareness test. How many passes does the team in white make?
Did you get the answer?
The answer is 13.
13.
But did you see the moonwalking bear?
There's the key question. Did you see the moonwalking bear? Let's watch it again. So right in the middle of your screen, check out the bear there, just doing the little moonwalk, dancing across the screen, doing his thing. And here's the key. Here's the point. It's easy to miss something that you're not looking for. It's not surprising. It's not unusual when I'm doing this event in person and we've got parents and providers there with us. Most people, or at least some, will get that number of passes right. They're really focused. They're really dialed in. But I've yet to meet someone who, unless they've seen the video before, they're cheating. I've yet to meet someone who notices the moonwalking bear, even though it's right there in plain sight. It's right in front of you. And that's what we're talking about here tonight. And this is that key concept to understand, is that what is going on is right here in plain sight. We know it. We just haven't really looked at it in the right light. We haven't connected the dots in the way that we're going to explain here, because I cannot tell you how many parents, after I'll share this with them, the response is something along the lines of, oh my gosh, this makes so much sense. Why has no one ever told me this before? And that is why I'm spending my evening here with you guys tonight, is because I'm sick of parents telling me that when their kid is 8 or 12 or 6 or at any age. We want to have more parents know how we can help their kids reach their fullest potential from as early as possible. So I'll try not to get on too much of a tangent here and a rant from the get-go, but that is what tonight is about. How can we find this moonwalking bear? So key concept. That's how we're going to lay out the rest of this evening. Is I want to share a few big picture, broad concepts of what is this perfect storm, this pathway of how we go from pregnancy and birth all the way to kids struggling with XYZ issues. How are those things all connected? Once we lay that out, and once you hear that, I'm not going to ask you to take my word for it. We're going to go through a quick scientific neurological explanation. I promise we won't get too nerdy. We'll keep it super simple, super straightforward, but I want to explain the how and the why and back that up with research, with literature and science. So this first key concept that we've got to understand is this: you cannot be in growth and protection at the same time. That could be true of a family, a nation, an organism, a bug, a human. You are either in a growing, thriving, healthy, and developing mode, or your body is shut down. You're in survival mode. You're in protection mode because you feel and you're experiencing that there's some sort of threat. This is a brilliant quote from Dr. Bruce Lipton, a stem cell biologist and really one of the leaders in epigenetics. And the understanding that our bodies and our health is really not our genetics. It's the stuff that we choose to do, the lifestyle factors, the decisions that we make on a daily basis. And so this is one of the things that his research found. And the way we talk about it, the way we explain it in the office to make it really simple for you, is this gas pedal and brake pedal balance. So we've got your gas pedal, and these are the two halves or the two sides of your nervous system. Your gas pedal is your protection mode. That is your go, 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 fight or flight survival mode. You might have think of it, the high school textbook in science class said the caveman is at the watering hole and he's got to decide, do I fight this tiger or do I run away? And that is perfect. That's the adrenaline, the cortisol, everything kicks on when we're in survival mode. It's great when we need to survive. It's not so great for living everyday life, because when we're in the gas pedal mode, all of the brake pedal functions shut down. In our brake pedal, that is our growth and development mode. That's when we're resting properly. That's when our immune system and our digestion are doing what they're supposed to. Our development, like the developmental milestones and higher levels of brain function, are working as they should. And none of that takes place if we're in survival mode, which is smart. That's how our body should work. Because if the caveman, if the more primitive society is truly in a survival situation, they just need blood going to the extremities, the arms and the legs and the muscles, because they just need to be able to physically survive. Whereas in our day and age, that's not really the case. We want higher level brain functions. We want higher level brain development, not a brain that is stuck in a primitive survival protection mode, right? So this balance is the key to understanding why our kids are so struggling. The perfect storm in a nutshell is the overwhelm of neurological stressors that pushes a kid towards this gas pedal side. And when you get stuck in that gas pedal, you're missing all of the growth and development functions. So what pushes us towards that gas pedal mode? We call them the 3 T's, and that's right there in the middle of the slide: thoughts, traumas, and toxins. So there's physical, chemical, and emotional stresses. You might think of the physical ones as big things, a car wreck, a fall off of a ladder, slip on the ice, stuff like that. For our kids, it's basically the America's Funniest Home Video reels, the flipping off the bed or falling down the slide, or a million things that unfortunately we get to see our kids do every day. But there's also the little things, the micro traumas, the chronic poor posture, the repetitive motions at a job. And for kids, a big one of the former, a big, one-time event trauma that doesn't really get talked about is birth trauma. That birth process, in utero constraint during pregnancy, and then the actual birth, especially when it involves any sort of intervention or pulling or twisting at the head and neck, is a significant trauma and stress to them. And we're going to lay out exactly how that affects so much of the neurology. So chemical toxins, that's the one that you're probably deep in Dr. Google with. The air we breathe, the water we drink, the food we eat is all more toxic than it used to be. It's, an apple from 50 years ago just has better nutrition than it does today. That's reality. We should certainly limit it as much as we can, right? We should go out of our way to have organic fruit, to not have, dyes and artificial flavors and colorings in what we eat. But to a certain extent, we can only run so far from that outside of, us all here on this webinar moving to a private island and starting our own community. And the last one is thoughts, emotional stresses. And that's easy to think of for an adult because you can think of the relational stresses, the work, politics, and bills to pay and all these things. But that's real for kids too, whether it's, going through puberty in your body and hormones are changing. Maybe it's, early on and our kids in our peer groups accepting me. Do I get along well with others or not? And it's even all the way back to a newborn. It's super simple for a newborn. It's either, am I warm? Am I dry? Am I protected and loved? Or am I missing that? They don't have that higher level functioning. So it's a very black and white. Am I happy and comforted? Or am I feel like I'm in some sort of survival mode? So these three things can all push us towards that gas pedal, fight or flight, and stress mode. So when these three T's converge early in life and when they converge more significantly, that is what leads to the perfect storm. So I've been throwing this perfect storm term around. What does that mean? The perfect storm is all of this. It's anything from pregnancy stress to poor sleep and nursing difficulty and antibiotics and chronic ear infections and autism and sensory processing disorder. It can be anything from that realm, but it doesn't have to be all of them, right? Some kids that we meet, they check all of those boxes and they've been through every level and every step of that storm. But the more of that's been there in your life and the earlier that it took place, the more significant that it's going to be. So rather than this hodgepodge, this mess of stuff on the slide, let me walk through a couple steps that we typically see this perfect storm unfold and develop in. And since I'm gonna go off the slide here for a second, let me shut down the screen share so we can talk face to face, so to speak, again. And so what we're talking about here in this perfect storm pathway, we see it start off usually with a fearful, stressful, intervention-based pregnancy. If you think back to any recent baby showers or pregnancy stuff that you've been at recently, it almost always involves a gift of some sorts. And that gift is a book called What to Expect When You're Expecting. In my mind, that is not really an educational resource. That's a Stephen King novel. It's a horror film of everything that could go wrong during pregnancy. And not to pick too much fun at, What to Expect and all the series there. But reality is that's kind of indicative of our culture as a whole's view of birth and pregnancy in that process. It's very fear and intervention based. We think we've been diagnosed with this pregnancy disease and now cross your fingers. Hopefully we can make it out of the other end alive. It's not an empowering experience. It's not something that, our moms end up feeling supported and rejuvenated. It ends up being something that leaves them feeling alone and lost. And there's a whole other conversation we could have on, how we can support that process and how the birth team needs to be different. And that we're actually doing an event in a couple of weeks for that exact purpose. But tonight's conversation is not there. But suffice it to say that when we are starting our pregnancy journey in this fearful and stressful mindset, that usually sets the stage for the second step, which is a more fearful, stressful, intervention-based labor and delivery. And so what that means is maybe the mom goes a little bit late. We get 40 weeks in one day, and all of a sudden we're magically overdue, and we have to start doing different induction measures. And maybe that's Pitocin or Cervidil or different things that start that labor process before it's actually ready. or maybe there's complications early on that have to get in, we need induced or whatever it is. One way or another, typically the birth process does not proceed as it's supposed to. And what I mean by that is mom and baby calling the shots and no one else doing anything but catching the little one when the time comes. That's what our bodies and mom's bodies were designed for, but that's rarely what takes place. So when we deviate from that, when we start one intervention, more often than not, it's a slippery slope where we need to add more and more and more. And that changes how that normal ebb and flow of the baby and mom's hormones go. And more often than not, that leads in baby who's not able to enter the world on their own. Maybe the mom is stuck on her back because of an epidural or because the hospital won't let her labor in different positions. And now baby can't turn or move or rotate their shoulders and their head in the proper way to come through that birth canal. Oftentimes that leads to midwives or doctors' hands actually having to go on baby's head and neck and pull and turn and twist to get them out of the birth canal. Sometimes it's even more significant and severe than that. And it's forceps or it's vacuum extraction when there's immense amounts of force and tractioning, pulling and lengthening at that baby's head and then turning and twisting at the same times. And sometimes it even culminates in a C-section delivery, which is, we're going to actually look at a little clip of here in a minute, a really significant trauma and birth injury for little ones. So we've got all these factors coalescing to a birth process that usually involves some sort of physical trauma and physical intervention. So when we've got a baby who's going through pregnancy, experiencing the world in a very stressful, fearful environment, because that's what mom is experiencing it in. Now baby is starting the world primed to think that the world is a stressful war zone, right? They're primed for that gas pedal, fight or flight stress mode. So we're coming out not in a healthy balance state, but in survival mode. And when we combine that with the injuries and the damage to the upper part of the neck, usually we don't have a very healthy newborn. We've got a newborn who is often colicky, maybe struggling with reflux. They probably aren't nursing and latching very well. They might have what's called torticollis, or their head is always cocked to the side. It's always rotated in the same direction, which usually ends up with a flat spot in the back of the head. So we've got all of these things compounding, and it's just not a healthy newborn. And for many of the parents that are listening, if you probably know exactly what I'm talking about, if that was your experience. In this newborn, what often the family gets told is, I know this is hard, this is tough, whether it's the reflux, the colic, something like that, but they will grow out of it, right? 6 months, 12 months down the road, it's going to be fine. No big deal. They'll grow out of it. And you know what? Babies aren't colicky forever, right? You don't have, well, some might say you've got 25-year-old colicky ladies and men, but it looks a little differently. We call it something differently, at least. So they do grow out of it in a way, but what we prefer to say, and the reality is they don't really grow out of those problems. They just grow into the next thing. Because I can tell you, we've talked to countless parents that when their life starts in that path, it turns into a baby or a toddler who now is starting to deal with stuff like ear infections, right? They're around 1, 1.5, and 2, and now they've got their first round of antibiotics, and then it's another one and another one. Sometimes that even leads to tubes. Sometimes it leads to multiple rounds of tubes. So they've got these chronic ear infections, and then, the tubes come in, saves the day, but the same problem is still there, right? We've still got the same injury, the same damage that's at the top part of the neck. So since that's not going away, the problem continues. And that doesn't, once again, they don't grow out of it, but usually that fluid in that drainage issue comes down and it sets up in the tonsils and the adenoids. And that's why we've got so many kids who are needing their tonsils, their adenoids removed. And we think, oh, that's no big deal. I don't know if you've shopped at IKEA before, but typically your IKEA box has some random spare parts in it. Same thing with the human body, spare parts, no big deal, cut them out, we don't need them. That's not my perspective. Maybe thank goodness that we have medicine, that we have medical procedures like that can save the day when there are serious things going on. But personally, I think it would be a lot more wise to be cautious on those and to maybe look into the why they're happening instead of just jumping to interventions and procedures. So we've got tonsils and adenoids. Usually this turns into an older kiddo now who's got strep throat, chronic immune system issues. They're sick all the time. Maybe it's bronchitis, pneumonia as it keeps setting down in. And at this point, maybe it's 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, and sometimes it's even younger. the neurological challenges start to show up as well. Then we start to see it's not just the immune system or other things like that that are showing up. This is now a kid who's dealing with like sensory things. Maybe the tags on the shirts are bothering them all the time. It's loud noises or sensory things with foods. There's different warning signs that you've seen, maybe pediatricians have pointed out, that are making you wonder if that developmental mindset and that those developmental milestones are on track. So that is where we end up. That is the culmination of the perfect storm, which is what we're, talking about here tonight, with a kid who's stressed out with anxiety, with sensory processing disorder, and ADHD, OCD, the whole, any diagnosis, any label that you want to throw at it. I was just chatting with one of the moms who had registered this evening, sharing that yes, the diagnosis is helpful and important, but the label, the diagnosis, doesn't really answer the why and the cause like we shared earlier. So it doesn't really matter what the label is. If there's that same underlying stress and injury, especially at the top part of the neck, you're not really going to you're not going to grow out of it for sure. You're not going to get around the corner on it. So I know that was like, we just kind of need to like exhale and take a deep breath. That was a lot. That was fast. That was hot and heavy. We're going to slow down. We're going to backtrack a little bit. But that is the perfect storm in a nutshell, right? Your kid doesn't have to check every one of those boxes, but the more that are there, the more that tells us that stressed out fight or flight nervous system has been there from the get-go, which probably means it's going to take longer for it to get out of that mode. So as we circle back around, and let me pull up those slides again. And since that was a lot of information and we were moving kind of quickly there, once again, feel free to add questions, add comments. I can't always be checking it, but every once in a while we stop the video here and I'll jump on there and see if there's anything specifically I can add and guide you with. So we're back to our perfect storm. The question that you're wondering is, once again, like I said when we were starting out here, what in the world does that have to do with a chiropractor? I would love to answer that question. I'd love to walk through that. And really, it comes down to a few S words. So let's check these out here, and it's going to be easy to remember. When there is a shift in your spine, that stress mode that we're talking about, your sympathetic stress, fight or flight, gas pedal mode of your nervous system gets stuck on. It gets locked in. It's like you slam the pedal to the floor and the brakes aren't able to regulate and to balance that back out. So that is exactly what Thrive Chiropractic has to do with this, is when we're able to correct and unravel that stress within the main operating system, the main sensory system of the body, it's able to calm that gas pedal. It's able to bring the brakes back online and allow your child to come back to a balanced point, back to that growth and development mode, so those milestones and those developments can catch up. Now, I am thrilled and I am more than happy to end the video tonight right now if you're willing to just take my word for that. If you're willing to say, you know what, that is 100% my kid, and oh my gosh, I cannot wait to get in and get started and make a difference for them. Stop listening and we'll see you in the office next week. But I'm not going to make you do that. I don't want you to simply take my word for it, because that's not how I work, right? It drives my wife crazy. I want someone to prove it to me, to lay it out, to explain, how is that actually the case? Why is that true? So that's really what we're going to take the next couple of minutes to do here before I share a story of one of our patients, is we're going to walk through with a little bit of sciencey and nerdiness. How is it that this stress, this shift in the spine leads to your nervous system and your gas pedal being stuck on? And the way we do that is through what we call our 4D model. So these are 4 fancy D words that all, explain these different concepts we're talking about. You don't have to memorize them. You don't have to take notes or anything like that. Just understand the concepts that we're talking about. So before we get to that, one more key concept that we've got to know is this: the function of the nervous system is to perceive the environment and then coordinate the behavior of all of their cells. What that means is we've got to get things aligned properly. When I would just, if we didn't have these words highlighted and bolded, you would probably first go to the behavior part. When you hear this, you feel like, okay, nervous system is doing these things. It's what runs the behavior. And that's understandable. That's really where most providers and most parents are focused on, is the behavior, the outcome, the outbursts, the lack of focus, the anxiety. And that's where it should be, right? That's what we want to change. But what we've got to realize is that behavior isn't really the issue. The behavior is just the result of what's coming in. Our nervous system takes everything in, is perceiving the environment at all times. It coordinates, it integrates all that. And then the behavior is just the outcome. So the behavior is just the end result of whatever's coming in, which means if there's the wrong information coming in, we have no chance of the proper behavior, the proper outputs, the proper decisions being made neurologically. Does that make sense? So basically, we need to think about things from more of an input problem than an output problem. Garbage in means garbage out. So really, if there is a label that I think is accurate and summarizes what is going on in every sort of perfect storm situation, it is sensory processing disorder. And more therapists and people that are doing these diagnoses are realizing that, because you might have a child who's diagnosed with like ADHD and sensory processing, or autism and sensory processing. It's kind of getting tagged on to a lot of these other labels, because it really is at the root of what's taking place. Is those things are usually not going to happen unless there's an inward perception problem. So this first D is dyskinesia. And what that really means is misalignment and fixation. It's a lack of movement. Stuff is either stuck or it's malpositioned. It's not moving properly. And listen, all of our milestones, all of our neurological development, it comes back to movement. Movement is everything from babies on up, right? If we stood up now and did 20 jumping jacks, or, bring your knees to your elbows, things like that, you're going to spend energy doing it, but you're going to feel more energized afterwards, because it's feeding your brain. It's fueling that good brain food. So this movement is crucial. This is also where we run into our really big moonwalking bear. This first thing takes place, this misalignment and fixation. The biggest place this takes place in our kids is the birth process. At least I'll say the biggest place it's taking place. Man, this is starting to get jumbled up. The biggest area that we see this show up in is the birth. And that's the biggest one that's not being talked about, right? So that is really the key here. If you've followed my mess of words here, is that the birth process is not being seen as a trauma or as an injury, when it absolutely is. So the next thing I have here is actually a short clip of a C-section delivery. It's not gory, there's not blood squirting or anything like that, but it is reality. It is reality of showing how much force is involved in that. So I just want to give you that quick caveat. And if you think you might be uncomfortable with that, feel free to look away. You'll hear me talking and you can jump back in here in a second. But that's what I want to put up here next, is that video of the C-section clip.
Irritated. Oh, there you go. Come on, buddy. All right. Ears of a girl. Ears of a girl. Make you cute for the camera. Oh, man. There you go.
That's always hard for me to watch, as I'm sure it is for you, even though I've seen it countless number of times now, because even without having the anatomy and physiology training, you probably know that that is not okay. You probably know intuitively that that cannot be happening. Think back to, and let me push pause here for a second. I mean, think back to when you had a newborn, when you had your little one. A lot of times, family wants to come visit at the hospital. They want to hang out. And what often happens is Dr. Uncle Joe or Grandpa or someone wants to come and hold the baby, but that they're not really comfortable. They're not really someone that you would trust fully holding them. And so what do? You position them in the couch, you have pillows propped up, and as you're handing your precious newborn to them, what do you say? You say, protect the head, hold the neck, cradle the neck here. Because we know intuitively that babies have these ginormous cute heads and these tiny little bodies, and they can't support themselves yet, right? They're not able to fully hold up and stabilize their own head. But just a couple days ago, we used that precious head and neck as a lever, and we pulled up and we tractioned up and we turned and we twisted and we rotated on it. And that's going to leave significant amounts of damage. I always, especially when there's dads in the room and we're sharing, I always can relate to them. Not that, moms would do anything different. If someone did that to your newborn, anything in any context outside of the birth process, if someone grabbed them by the head and neck, let alone pulling on the other side, we probably wouldn't be here right now. We'd be in jail for whatever we did to that person. But reality is that happens every day, every second in birth rooms. And this is not to say that our birth team and our OBs and stuff are bad people, because they're doing a great job of what their goal is, of making sure baby and mom make it out alive, make it out as best as they can. But what they don't see is what happens next, right? Because once that birth team has mom and baby stable, they're on to the next one, right? They've got things to do, and they don't really follow and track the health of mom or little one. Whereas then the pediatrician picks up, and the pediatrician is seeing everything that takes place at that point, but they don't really ask or care or think about what birth was like. So there's a disconnect. There's a moonwalking bear. There's something that's in plain sight, but no one is looking for. No one is connecting the dots and realizing how significant the connection between how we enter the world and how we birth is with how the rest of health goes, with the health outcomes that we're talking about, whether it's a fussy newborn or an ear infections riddled toddler or a kid dealing with sensory processing disorder and ADHD. More times than not, it's coming back to a stressful pregnancy, in utero constrained, and a traumatic birth experience. And that traumatic birth experience doesn't have to be a C-section. It can just be doctor's hands pulling and turning at the neck. And that's why when we're talking with parents, a lot of times they don't even know what that birth process was like, because you're in a whole nother zone, you're in a whole nother world. And the team doesn't even think to mention that, because that's normal, that's accepted. But the amount of pressure on average used in the birth process is 60 to 90 pounds of pulling and tractioning force, which would be like if we grabbed that baby by the head and neck and hung a 60 to 90 pound dumbbell from them. So I hope that is clear then, that you can see how that process, whether there was any sort of intervention, significant or not, is going to be a pretty intense misalignment and fixation at the top part of the neck, because this area is a little bit more unstable. Since we can turn our head so freely, that range of motion increase is compensated for by lack of stability and lack of, really solid structure around there. And so this very vulnerable, very important part of the spine ends up with some sort of misalignment and fixation during that birth process. I'm going to pop back over to the slides here because we've got a couple other things to explain. So question you might be wondering is, does that really happen that often? And is it really connected? Does that really have a bearing? I mentioned, I promised research and studies. Here's a couple quick ones. I know you can't read them on the screen here. Feel free to reach out and we'll send you the references. We'll send you more info. One study here was, and let me start actually on the study that's on the right side, at least on the right side of my screen. And that is the 99 out of 100 healthy newborns had some stress in the spine. This was a study that evaluated healthy newborns, and it was done by a group of osteopaths in Europe. And what they found is, and that what they were checking for is exactly what we're talking about: issues with the structural system of the spine. They had 100 healthy newborns, which means not severe birth trauma, not major stuff going on. And what they found is that 99 out of 100 of those kids had some sort of physical misalignment and fixation taking place. So yes, it is happening, and it is incredibly, incredibly common, even in healthy kids. To answer that other question is, does this really correlate to issues down the road? This next one is explaining the increased risk in autism in children whose mothers experience birth complications. And that's exactly what the study found, is there is a massive, massive increase in kids with autism when the birth process involved more complications, more interventions, more of exactly what we're talking about here. So that is our first big D, is there's some misalignment and fixation, especially at the top part of the neck, because that is such a key area. What that's going to lead to then is the second one, which is disafferentation. Once again, don't worry about the fancy D word, but it's abnormal input. When we don't have the proper structure and movement, it means the information coming up to the brain is going to get jumbled. So how that works, our brain always has to be perceiving. The brain doesn't stop, it doesn't rest, it doesn't shut down. So it's got to be always taking in information, whether that's good or bad. What it should be is this word called proprioception. That is your body's awareness of yourself in space. It's how you can close your eyes and touch your elbow without looking at it, because you are aware of your joints and where everything is positioned. Every ligament, every receptor, every joint capsule, everything like that in your body is covered in these sensors that are sending your brain information. We need to know, are we walking up nice and tall, or are we crooked and walking around sideways? So this is what the body constantly needs to be perceiving. But if our spinal joints aren't properly aligned, and if they're stuck, which is exactly what we're talking about here with that first D, they're not going to be able to send the brain the proper information. So instead of that nice smooth motion, because motion is the main way that we feed the brain, if they're locked in there, if they're jammed, if they're not moving properly, the way I like to explain it is if you take a sledgehammer to your door hinge, it's not going to move very well. It's not going to move very smoothly on a straight plane. That is no longer going to be sending the brain good information. It's going to be sending the brain a stress signal because there's a problem. So now, instead of our brain's good nutrition, good food that's constantly being stimulated, our brain is perceiving what I call noise. It's just stress to the brain. You can think of that as if Metallica was blaring in the background. So instead of, right now us having this conversation in a nice quiet office, maybe the comfort of your couch at home, imagine if we had big speakers blaring Metallica as loud as they can. You're not going to hear me. We're not going to be able to focus, and there's just going to be a tension and anxiety in the room. That is what's taking place here, is that nociception is bombarding the brain with noise. It's bombarding the brain with background stress. And not to get too ahead of myself here, but one of the scans that we do in the office actually measures that. We can quantify and put a number to how much stimulation the brain is perceiving. Is it right what it should be, or are we hearing way too much background energy? Which I've yet to meet a raging bull, ADHD, stressed out kid who doesn't have way too much stimulation into the brain. So we need this good food. The bad nutrition, the noise, is what is constantly stressing our kids out and making it impossible to focus. And here's the thing. The majority of your body's input, the majority of that proprioception comes from your spine. It comes from this core and this midline, which makes sense. If we know how our center is positioned, your body has a good idea of where the limbs are, where everything else is. So the majority of that information is right in the middle. But even more so, the majority of the spine's proprioception comes from the top part of the neck back to this key area. So not only is it around the brainstem, not only is it what getting the most damage from the birth process, it's also the area your body has the most proprioception, which once again, you can probably understand because it makes sense. There's so many fine motor things going on at the top part of our neck. Like if our body highly prioritizes walking with our eyes level. So if there's any sort of tilt or kink here, we're going to have to adapt. So if our head is positioned this way, we're not going to walk around crooked. You're going to bend your shoulders and your spine to compensate for that, which is why things like scoliosis and other issues develop, is because your body is really intelligent. It's compensating for other issues. So you can hopefully see where we're going here, that we start off with that misalignment and fixation, which changes the good nutrition coming up to the brain, turns it into noise and stress and toxic bombarding Metallica, which leads us to the next one then. Fancy D word is dysautonomia. And even though you might not have heard that word, or you might not have heard of the autonomic nervous system, you actually have. If you've been tuning in, if you've been following along here tonight, that autonomic nervous system is what we talked about earlier with the gas pedal and the brake pedal. It's your body's balance between the fight or flight stress mode and the calming growth and development mode. So if you're just jumping in now, catch the replay later and go back and listen to that discussion on how the gas pedal versus brake pedal balance is so important for overall health. So this imbalance in the nervous system, garbage in, if we're not perceiving the right stuff, means garbage out. It's going to change how the gas pedal versus brake pedal balance functions, specifically the vagus nerve. So we got to talk about Vegas a little bit, and it's not Las Vegas. It is the vagus, VAGUS nerve, because this is your body's brake pedal. This is what runs the majority of digestion, the majority of your immune system. It's the heart, the lungs, the spleen, the pancreas, the stomach. It's all of those organs. You can see it on your screen there. It's called vagus because that means wandering, and it wanders through the whole body. And guess where it comes out of your body? It's a cranial nerve. It comes out of the base of your skull and goes right in front of that C1 transverse process. So it's not hard to believe and to see when we have misalignment and fixation, when they have that force and that pulling on a baby's head and neck during the birth process, it really, really easily is impacting this vagus nerve and leading to a brake pedal that's shut down. So now we've got noise coming into the brain, bombarding stress, bombarding metallica. And what's supposed to balance that out with the vagus nerve, the brakes, it's not happening. We've cut the lines. We don't have the vagus nerve functioning anymore. And that's one other thing I got to touch on here, because a lot of parents, because you're so educated, because you've been digging into so many things, by the time you meet us and by the time we're sitting down, you probably have heard of the gut brain connection, and you're looking at diets and detoxes. And that's fantastic. That's lowering that chemical toxic burden on your body that we talked about earlier. But the thing is that the gut brain, as it's often talked about, is really not the way it works. It's more of the brain gut connection, right? Even though, yes, there is serotonin, there's all these hormones and things that are released in the gut, it's still the brain that's modulating stuff like probiotic balance, and it's the brain and the vagus nerve that's running all of those things. And that's one of the studies here, the vagal innervation of the gut and immune homeostasis, is what really explains that and lays it out. So if that is a new concept to you or something you want to learn about, please send us a message. We'll get you the reference and info to that as well. So we've got a really bad combination here, because garbage in with the, misalignment fixation leading to stress to the brain is slamming the gas pedal to the floor. So we've got gas pedal, gas pedal, gas pedal, and our brakes, our calming growth and development side, have been shut down because of this stress at the top part of the neck. It's like a Ferrari engine with bicycle pedal brakes. And if you tell your kid that, maybe you've got a ADHD raging bull son, tell them, hey, does it ever feel like your brain is going like a Ferrari or, whatever their favorite car has, and you're trying to slow down with brake pedals? They will 100% latch onto that. I've explained it that way to many kids, and they say, yes, that's exactly what it is. They want to calm down, they want to slow down, but those brakes just can't handle the engine, can't handle the mental stimulation. I think I've got another study here. This is the last really research study. So if that's boring you out, we're almost there. It's important. But this is one of my favorite ones, because it's showing exactly what we're talking about here. It's measuring the vagus nerve, which another way of saying that is vagal activity, specifically in kids with sensory processing disorder. We said earlier, sensory processing disorder is kind of the catch-all that fits with any of these labels. And what they found is that comparing kids with sensory processing disorder and kids who were normally developing, didn't have any of those symptoms, the kids in the sensory processing disorder group had lower vagal nerve activity. Basically, their vagus nerve was turned down. We got to turn the volume down. But they took it a step farther, and they compared all of the kids within the sensory group, and the ones, some have more severe symptoms, some have less severe symptoms. And the worse the symptoms were, the worse the severity is, the lower the vagus nerve activity was. So it's really a straightforward relationship. The vagus nerve is turned off, means the sensory system is jumbled up because we don't have a brakes. Like I explained earlier, it's like you're stuck in the gas pedal mode with no brakes. Take another breath, take another exhale. I know we're learning a lot here. And I'm not afraid, honestly, to go a little sciencey, go a little nerdy, because I think you deserve it. Like, I think you deserve to have those answers. You deserve to know the why. And I think you can handle it, honestly. The parents that I've met whose kids are struggling and dealing with these things, they're really intelligent. They've done their research. They know what's going on. They understand maybe even the autonomic nervous system and some of the things that we're talking about. So let's wrap it up with that last D, dysponesis. So this is the behavior, right? We talked about the function of the nervous system is to perceive the environment and coordinate the behavior of all of our cells. Now we're to the outcome. We've seen that the garbage, if we have bad information, bad stimulation in, it's going to lead to the garbage out. And so that is dysponesis. The way that we categorize these things, like we talked about labels earlier, and it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. But the categories that we see kids fall into are these three: raging bull, drunken bull, and raging drunken bull combination. I know it's super creative. Let me explain how these work, and maybe you'll see that your kid fits into one more than the other. Raging bull is the just stuck on the gas pedal. They're go, 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 no brakes. Typically, diagnoses with this, ADHD, sensory processing disorder, probably anxiety, OCD, stuff like that. The drunken bull is more of the disconnected, disorganized, clumsy speech issues, usually immune system issues. They've probably got ADD, without the hyperactivity component. The sensory issues, more like learning disabilities, maybe dyslexia, speech, language, learning delays, probably some motor issues. Usually it's not kids that love playing sports, things like that. And then we get to the combo. The raging drunken bull is the most severe cases, like really intense ADHD and anxiety and sensory stuff, or maybe even the kind of the tip of the perfect storm, which is autism, epilepsy, things like that. So these three categories, part of the information that we can group people by is based off of their case history, because the way that we would go about care planning for each of these different types of situations is slightly different. So part of it's based on their case history, like that conversation that we'll have in the office. And then part of it is based off of technology. It's based off of scans. We're living in the technology area. I'm doing this from our office, and hopefully if everything's working well, you're tuning in from the comfort of your home. We've got cameras and microphones and lights and all these things that are readily available. Why wouldn't we be using the best, highest level of technology for your healthcare as well? Hopefully that's what you expect from other providers. That's absolutely what I expect from my family. And so that's what we try to bring to you as well. So these different scans let us objectively quantify and measure what's going on with your kid. I've got a lot of corny chiropractor dad jokes, being that I am a chiropractor and a dad. And one of them is the scans dictate the plans, or another way to say it is we don't guess, we test. Because what we see within the nervous system is going to dictate how we can help and where we're going to go for your care plan. So these three different scans are going to measure, one, just that big picture 30,000 foot view of your gas pedal and your brake pedal. That sensory processing disorder study that we were just talking about, this is the same technology that is being used in that study, measuring the vagus nerve that we do here in the office. So that is our big picture view. And then we've got two other scans that let us quantify more specifically where within the nervous system there's some issues and some stresses. So it's, you could think of it as like where there's a blown fuse. You know, the nerves going to different parts of the body control different functions. So if we see it's stuff in the top part of the neck and the lower back or the mid back, that's helping us know what that child might be dealing with, and therefore how we can best help. Like I said, it's getting us to the why. It's getting us to the answers behind things. And then the last scan is going to do more of the same, but it's also going to let us quantify what's that noise, what's that stress, what's that input coming in to the back of the brain at all times. So I think the best way to wrap up and close this evening here, as I'm kind of starting this here, let me check and make sure that we don't have any other questions or thoughts on Facebook you guys are leaving there for me. But as we're wrapping up here, I would love to share Claire's story. And Claire's story is from one of our patients at the office. And this is one that I love. I don't love how it starts out though. And that's, let's take a look at that first. So when we met Claire, she had the typical perfect storm case history. She was a baby that had trouble latching. She was colicky. She had reflux, ear infection after ear infection. She was 8 or 9 years old when we met her. I think it would have been 8. She just celebrated her birthday. It would have been 8 when we met her. And the way her mom described her, she was always anxious. Sleep wasn't great. Dyslexia was something that she was constantly going to therapies, vision therapy for. She was more of the ADD. Like she's kind of a little hyper, had some focus issues, but more of the just attention was all over the place, right? Couldn't focus on anything. Balance and coordination were great. Like she enjoyed sports, but they didn't come easily because her body was disconnected. Mom, the way she put it was she was just exhausted. She was frustrated. She didn't really know where else to turn. She was more naturally minded and more, she'd prefer going that route. But the way she described it to us is she'd tried everything but medications. They'd made dietary changes. You know, they'd gotten rid of red dyes. They'd been using essential oils. They're doing all these great things, and it kind of made a difference, but they didn't know where to go next. So that's what Claire was like when we met her. And let's check out that first scan for her. So we have several different ones, but we're going to focus on this one here. Let me give you a little scanning 101. White is normal. White is what it should be. Green, blue, and red are mild, moderate, and severe stresses. Just that little bit of information, you can tell that Claire's scan probably has some issues. That total energy number that you see off to the side of 242, what we should see for that is 100. So 100 will be just the right amount of energy spent. This is measuring that metallica that we talked about. The metallica is the noise. It's the bombarding, constant stress into the brain that's running in the background, even if we're in the middle of a quiet, calm classroom. So Claire's initial scan, we saw that total energy was up at 242 instead of at the 100. So it was almost 2.5 times what she was supposed to be experiencing when all she was doing was sitting at rest. So of course it's going to be hard to focus when your brain is constantly hearing that, right? You can't sit still and learn in math class if you are trying to deal with the Metallica blaring in the back of your head. So this is what was going on with Claire when we met her. And then what did we do? What happened? So care at the office is the adjustment. It's unraveling those 4 Ds. So let's look at what happens when we intervene in that process. The adjustment, we're finding those areas of neurological stress, of misalignment and fixation, and we're restoring proper motion and balance to that. What that does is it normalizes input up into the brain. Instead of the Metallica, the noxious, chaotic stress signals, now we've got good brain food. Once we've got good brain food, we're not going to have the garbage coming out because we have good information coming in. So garbage in means garbage out, but good in means good coming out. And so that calms that stress response, the balance between the gas pedal versus brake pedal. It pumps the brakes and it connects the brain and body again. It allows for optimal health because there's not this disconnection. There's not this stress between how our brain is trying to run and what's actually taking place in the body. So what does that mean for Claire? This is what calming the storm looked like for her. The left scan was the first one. The right was not the end of the care plan because you can see there's still some color in there. But look at how much less red. Look at how much more white, and even the whites and the greens that we're seeing. And that total energy went from 242 all the way down to 158. So almost 100 points dropped down. And she's much, much closer to that normal, healthy balance. We don't have as much noise and nonsense stimulating the brain all the time. I care about that. I'm the sciencey, nerdy, like loves the scans person. But honestly, I know what you care and what her family and her mom care about more than anything is the next slide, which is how did that affect her everyday life? And I am more than happy to share that with you as well, because Claire was the August exam questionnaire we use in the office. I mean, in all of those areas, focusing much better. They said she'd been going to vision therapy for dyslexia. They'd seen improvements and it was going well. But once she started care that first month or two, the results just took off. They skyrocketed because her body was able to better connect and better perceive everything. The food one was kind of a surprise. We didn't even really talk about it that much, but she wasn't having as many allergic reactions and irritations to things she was eating. Because like we said, if your body doesn't have the brake pedal, if it's stuck in gas pedal mode, your digestion isn't really taking place properly. So even without changing the diet, we can see digestion really improve because, the phrase you are what you eat doesn't really make sense, right? You are what you absorb. So if your absorption isn't working, it doesn't really matter what you're eating. So food was way better for her. Overall, mood and anxiety had calmed way down. She said she was doing much better at sleeping. Vision therapy, like I said, was improving, was just not even getting sick anymore. And that's true of Claire and the rest of her family that have been under care now. They're barely ever fighting something off. And when they are, it's, for a day instead of a week like it used to be. So listen, guys, that I think is the best way to wrap it up because that's what we get to do. That's what we get to experience here in the office every day. Let me shut the screen down here again. The last thing, I know what we'd promised. Oh, lights turned out here. There we go. All right. We've been hanging out so long, the automatic lights are shutting off. So what we had promised was action steps. And I think that is the most important thing to leave with. If you've been paying attention, if you've been following along, you know that it's important to reduce and lower those 3 T's, the physical, chemical, and emotional stresses, thoughts, traumas, and toxins. Lowering those means we're fighting less of an uphill battle. It means your child's body is pushed less towards that stress pedal mode. But as much as that's important, I know what you're really wondering is if what we're talking about here tonight is what's going on with your child, right? You're wondering, could it really be this simple? Is the reason my child's been struggling with these issues because there's a disconnect between the brain and the body? Is the reason they can't sit still in class and in school because they're constantly being bombarded with Metallica? Is the reason they're always sick and dealing with ear infections or these sensory issues because their body is stuck in a gas pedal stress mode instead of a calming, balanced state? Maybe you're even wondering, is this why I can't sleep? Is this why I have headaches and all these things? And honestly, I don't know. I can't answer that question at this point. But I don't want to leave you with just, hey, thanks for coming. Hope you learned something and have a good night. I wouldn't feel right if I didn't give you an opportunity to at least find out. As much as I want to educate, as much as I want to inform, I don't want to stop there. We want to actually change your child's life and make a difference for them. I'm willing to bet they've had their eyes checked, their ears checked, their heart, their lungs, their nose, all of that. But I doubt that they've had their nervous system examined in the way that we're talking about, in the way that we do here at the office. So let me explain what that process looks like. What would it mean to just get checked and see if that's what's going on? At Thrive, a new patient relationship always begins with a complimentary consultation. And that is a chance to sit down, no pressure, no expectations. You can just learn more about what we do. We'll answer, what you can expect as far as care plan frequency, as far as costs involved in the office. Make sure that there's no surprises down the road, and make sure that we're the right fit for what you're looking for before you're investing more time and more money into exam and into care. Assuming that we are, and we have the chance to proceed on at that point, we'll go on and do our complete examination. That's where we're going to dig into this perfect storm case history, play CSI investigation, and connect the dots and get to the point where we can really understand how we got to where we are now. That's also where we're going to do these scans. We're going to objectively measure and quantify what's going on so we can have a starting point and then track it throughout care. Because we're not going to do these scans at the beginning and then completely forget about it. We'll repeat them at regular intervals throughout your process at the office, because we want to see what's changing. We want to know when we can make transitions to different phases and where we can, call audibles to that care plan if we're stuck with certain patterns. So all that is the first day where we'll collect all the information we need to know. And then a day or two later, whenever we set up that second visit, you're going to come back for your patient recommendation conference. That's where we're going to sit down. We'll answer a couple questions. We're going to say, all right, this is what we found. This is if we can help or not, just yes or no. And if we can, how long is it going to take? What's it going to cost? And at that point, you have a choice. We can start care, we can proceed and get things going at that point, or you can just leave, knowing that, well, at least we have an answer and we have something, we have the why that we can. I would obviously encourage you to take the next steps and to do something about it, but at least you'll know, at least you won't have to wonder anymore. As a thank you for joining us, for hanging out with us this evening, mention that you were on this webinar or mention that you caught a replay, and we'll make sure that we have a gift certificate, which takes $50 off of that initial exam and makes the process a little bit easier for you and your family. So please, guys, thank you again for tuning in. Thank you for reaching out. Hopefully you gathered that this is something that we're incredibly passionate about and something that really drives everything that we do at the office. So I would be more than happy to answer any questions. Leave a comment here, send us a message, give us a call. Please reach out and we'll look forward to setting something up and seeing what we can do to help. So thank you guys again. And I look forward to meeting you in the office and seeing what we can do to help your family thrive.